What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
Summertime and the living's easy. That's what I think of every time I think of summertime.
Bradley's on the microphone with Ross MG.
I love it.
You guys, it's interview week.
I like how I'm always genuinely surprised that it's interview week. And I just have got to do a better job of getting my whole life together.
Okay. We're holding on by a thread.
Oh man. But okay, it's interview week. Which release or which interview are we releasing?
Dr. J. Toomey.
Oh, the sorting hat himself, Dr. J. Toomey.
And we get to talk with Dr. Toomey, and he's a forensic psychologist, and he obviously specializes in the forensic evaluations. And so we have a whole really good conversation about psychopaths.
Sure. Yeah, psychopaths, sociopaths, bringing a little bit of, I don't know, I hope you guys have picked up that one of Bailey's pet peeves is when people use terminology incorrectly, right? So when people are like, oh, it's a psychopath, it's like, I mean, technically, that's not an actual diagnosis in the whatever.
Well, not everybody's on the narcissist bandwagon. They're like, he's a narcissist.
He's a narcissist.
Like, that's not how this works. What's that commercial, that old lady? And she's like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
I mean, that's pretty much it, though. All right.
And so to go with this interview, naturally, I had to choose a case where there was arguably some psychopathy involved.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, my gentle listeners, the challenge is, number one, all of the notorious psychopaths like Ted Bundy and Dahmer, that's been covered 1,000 times. I would cover Ed Kemper, but literally, I think there are 400 podcasts that have covered him.
Okay, but not only that, I feel like to cover it well, it would take multiple parts.
Yeah.
I feel it would be doing a disservice to give this flash in the pan episode on Ed Kemper, because it is such a sticky, crazy,
8 layers deep. Yeah. And so the other challenge was, there are a lot of quote unquote psychopaths out there. I love you, Dr. Toomey. Don't hate me for saying that. But not necessarily are their results of their forensic evaluations published, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of had to surmise based off of the things that they did to be like, would this person, if assessed by Dr. Toomey, right, in a forensic evaluation, would this person potentially score what needs to be scored in a psychopathy checklist to quote unquote diagnose him as a psychopath, right?
Right. So it's kind of like what you're always saying, that Venn diagram, right? That Venn diagram, that slice in the middle is kind of small as far as a case that's not super well known. And then also.
Yeah. So I know that this case has been covered, but I don't know if I actually heard of this case, or maybe I did a really long time ago. But I want to start off kind of a little bit differently for this episode. I wanted to start off kind of going through the psychopathy checklist.
Oh.
And so I wanted to talk about and we're not going to spend a lot of time because it could take forever, but there are 20 items, levels that they rank, and
characteristics, almost, maybe
characteristics. Yeah. And so I wanted to start off kind of going over that quickly. And then so that way you guys can be aware of that. So as we go through this case, you can listen and be like, oh, that seems like he would potentially check a box off to that item and that item and that item, right?
Yes. Sadly, one of the things that I thought that would make you a psychopath is not on there. We'll talk about that more with Dr. Toomey. If you eat things like hamburgers with a fork and a knife, you're totally normal. Actually, you don't make the list. So,
and I love Dr. Toomey, but for those of y'all who don't know, I can be a gullible person sometimes, usually when I'm not in therapy mode. When I'm in therapy mode, I'm usually anti-gullible. But outside, maybe it's my, my protective mechanism going through life, being gullible. And we're in this interview and he was like, yeah, like one of the line items is eating, pizza with cutlery. You're probably a psychopath. And Chelsea's laughing and I'm like, really? And he's like, no. And I was like, oh God, I just wanted to tap out. I wanted to crawl into a hole and just be like, oh, I knew that.
Oh, totally. No, totally. I knew that.
Oh, totally. I knew that. So fun facts, a couple of fun facts starting off. As far as some notable evaluations for the PCL-R, which is the Psychopathy Checklist revised, a couple of well-known that we can go through. So the Canadian serial killer duo, what they call him, the Ken and Barbie killer, Paul Bernardo and Carlo Homolka.
Yes.
Bernardo was evaluated as scoring a 35 out of a 40. Homolka was only scored as a 5 out of 40, but she was diagnosed a malignant narcissist.
Okay.
And so from what I gathered, in order to kind of quote unquote check the box for being a psychopath, you need to score above a 30 out of 40. So it is a spectrum. So some people could score a 15, but they're not technically considered a psychopath.
They're borderline psychopath.
Yeah. Ted Bundy was evaluated at a 39 out of 40.
Really?
Yeah. Jeffrey Dahmer was a 23 out of 40. John Wayne Gacy was a 27 out of 40.
Okay.
Let's see. Gary Ridgway. This one was interesting to me. The Green River Killer. He actually only scored a 19 out of 40.
Really? I thought he would score like a 90 out of 40.
19 out of 40. And then Lawrence Bittaker. So he was part of the Toolbox Killer.
Oh, yeah.
He scored a 39 out of 40. So him and Ted Bundy, from what I researched, were the highest scores, along with a guy named Peter London. And so Peter London, let's see here, was what? Swedish? No, he was from Denmark.
Danish,
thank you. I was like, I don't know what that word is right now. So, yeah. So some fun facts. Ted Bundy was a 39 out of 40. So
I wonder if Albert Fish, I mean, they didn't have the scoring system back then. I wonder if Albert Fish would have been way up there. He was the dude that had like...
Oh, I know.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I know all about Albert Fish.
Yeah. He had like the lampshades out of... Isn't that what Buffalo Bill? Didn't they model Buffalo Bill?
I thought that's Ed Gein.
Maybe I'm mistaken, which is usually how that works.
Yeah, Albert Fish was the serial killer pedophile in the I don't know, the
1920s,
early 1900s. Yeah. And he was the one who put like nails up his anus and stuff like that. So he was a weird dude.
Okay.
There's a lot there. Okay, so for the psychopathy checklist, everybody, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Item 1 is glibness or superficial charm. Okay. Check. Item 2, grandiose sense of self-worth. Item 3, a proneness to boredom and a need to be stimulated.
Crap, check.
Item 4 is pathological lying. Item 5 is being conning and manipulative. Item 6 is lacking remorse or guilt. Item 7 is having a shallow affect, so not a lot of depth in your emotions. Item 8 is being callous and lacking empathy. Item 9 is having a parasitic lifestyle. And so I thought that was interesting. I think we talk about that with Dr. Toomey about a parasitic lifestyle. Item 10 is poor behavioral controls. Item 11 is promiscuous sexual behavior. Item 12 is early behavioral problems. Item 13 is a lack of realistic long-term goals. Item 14 is impulsivity. Item 15 is irresponsibility. Item 16 is failure to accept responsibility for your own actions, like Danilo Restivo and Ronald Dominique.
Poor Bailey.
I hate that so much.
I hate those guys.
Item 17, many short-term relationships. It says marital relationships, so I don't know if that technically means legally married or committed. Item 18 is juvenile delinquency. Item 19 is revocation of conditional release. So essentially what I take that to be is like you get out of something and you break that. Right? Like you get out on probation and you violate that, I think. But I'm not a forensic psychologist, so I don't know. Item 20 is criminal versatility.
Mm. They got a
Okay.
good portfolio going on their
Yeah.
crimes.
Mm-hmm.
They've diversified their criminal portfolio.
Yeah. And so that is the psychopathy checklist. And so I wanted to bring that up. So whenever we get into this crazy dude, you guys can kind of think through that. And if I have a mind, Chelsea, you can help me. But to like maybe if something stands out, we can be like, oh, that's this on the psychopathy checklist or whatever.
Really quick, I'm notorious for asking questions that you don't know the answer to, so I'm going to go ahead and apologize if that's the case. There are 20 items, but you can score up to a 40. So am I assuming that each item maybe is like a 2-point score, something like that?
Yeah. So how it works is each of the 20 items is scored on a 3-point scale with a rating of 0 if it does not apply at all, 1 if there's a partial match or mixed information, and 2 is reasonably good match to the offender. So the highest you can
Okay.
score is a 2 for each question.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we're going to get into this case. Now, this easily could have turned into a 1,000-part episode,
Sure.
but this is already 20 pages. And so I'm going to try to not make it turn into a 2-parter.
No.
But it might be. So you guys will find out at the end if it's going to be a 2-parter or not. Okay. So I'm going to start off. The timeline is going to be just a little out of order. So I'm going to start off kind of 3/4 of the way at the end for a section, and then I'm going to jump back to the beginning.
Okay.
Okay. On February 6, 1996, 10-year-old Zachary Xerxes, or Zach Ramsey, left his apartment that he shared with his mother in Great Falls, Montana, and his brother and sister, and he left her in the morning around 7:34 to head to school. Zach was a 5th grader at Whittier Elementary School and would walk his usual route to school every morning. He would walk through an alleyway near the 400 block of North 4th Street. But that morning, Zach never arrived to school. School officials contacted Zachary's mother, Rachel, when Zachary failed to show up for school. His mother ended up filing a missing persons report later that afternoon, and Detective Bill Belushi was assigned to investigate Zach Ramsey's disappearance. By the time police were involved in the search for the missing boy, Zach's mother reported that he was last seen wearing a blue denim jacket with green sleeves, a blue football jersey with his last name imprinted on the back in gold letters, stonewashed jeans, and black high-top sneakers, which is the most 90s thing, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
There were several witnesses who reported that they saw Zach in the alley that morning. One family of 3 who lived in an apartment in the alleyway reported seeing Zach in the alleyway that morning, along with seeing an off-white 4-door car nearly run him over.
Oh.
Another witness reported seeing Zach standing in the alleyway, that he appeared to be waiting for someone. A third witness who lived near the end of the alleyway reported seeing Zach Ramsey crying with an upset, obese adult male following him a few feet behind. And they said this was about at 7:45 that morning.
So Zach was crying?
No, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they reported Zachary, the 5th grader, crying, and there was a man who was following him?
Yes.
Okay.
Detective Belushi was given a list of local registered sex offenders by the FBI, but he ignored it and focused his suspicions on a man named Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, who was not on this list of sex offenders.
Mm-hmm.
Belushi requested a search warrant for the property after police made an unsuccessful attempt to access the house where Bar-Jonah and his mother had lived together, but he was denied. Detective Belushi unsuccessfully solicited a new search warrant, and shortly afterward, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah moved out of his mother's house, and the search for the missing Zachary Ramsey would go on for years.
Wow.
And so that's where I'm going to leave it, to go back to the beginning before we circle back to what we just talked about.
Okay.
So Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah,
It's a lot of names.
that's a lot of names, was actually born David Paul Brown.
Oh.
And so I'm going to refer to this individual as Bar-Jonah throughout the whole case just to keep it consistent.
Okay.
So he was born David Paul Brown on February 5th, 1957 to Philip and Tyra Brown. Nathaniel was born and raised in Worcester, Massachusetts, where he lived with his 2 older siblings, Louise and Bob. Nathaniel's father was an aircraft mechanic and his mother was a housewife and homemaker. Early on, this is where the trouble starts. Even early on, there were signs that he wasn't a normal child.
Mm-hmm.
This may have been to the many traumas that he endured early on in life. When Tyra was 3 months pregnant with Nathaniel, so with Bar-Jonah, she was involved in a serious car accident. She was stopped at a red light when she was rear-ended, and it resulted in her having to wear a neck brace for the last 6 months of her pregnancy.
Oh my goodness. Do you want me to tell you a quick story about my pregnancy trauma?
If you want to.
So we went whitewater
Oh, yeah, I was
rafting.
there. Yeah.
You were there?
Yeah.
And I fell out
Fell
of the
out?
boat and it
Yeah.
squished me up against the rock.
You didn't even know you were pregnant yet.
And I was pregnant. I was pregnant with Inslee.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right. Because I told you the next day, or when I found out I was pregnant, and you looked at me and said, okay. Psychopath.
You guys could pay big bucks to come see me and feel real supported. Okay, so when Bar-Jonah was a baby, it was reported that he had serious aversions to being touched. And when he was just 3 weeks old, he experienced hydrocephalus. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to look that up because I was like,
Yes.
I don't know.
I do know what that one is.
And it's a neurological disorder caused by an abnormal buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in the ventricles deep within the brain. And so this excess fluid, I guess, can cause the ventricles to widen, putting harmful pressure on the brain's tissues. So you can have some sort of brain damage from that.
Correct.
Apparently.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but that's what all the articles said.
Correct.
And then at just 6 months old, Bar-Jonah came down with a fever upwards of 106 degrees.
Ooh.
Which is a super high fever, and that itself is also high enough to potentially cause brain damage.
Correct. Yeah, you can develop seizures, like febrile seizures. I mean, yes, that's extremely scary to have a fever that high.
And so before he was even a toddler, he had already had some of those physical traumas that we talked about on his brain specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then as an infant, he was described as being inactive and having an insatiable appetite, which resulted in him like constantly crying when he was not being fed. Like he ate all the time. And there were reports that even when Tyra was breastfeeding him, he would like almost make her nipples raw because he would just like chew and chew and chew. Yeah, couldn't get enough. And so this caused him to gain so much weight as a baby that he became practically immobile due to his underdeveloped muscle tone, and to the point where his parents even struggled to carry him.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes you wonder again, like with the brain activity, like were there connections, were there wires that just were not firing correctly? Like the stomach was not telling the brain that it was
full or whatever.
You know? Yes. Oh, bless his heart.
And Bar-Jonah would go on to say when he was older that he just loved to eat. He couldn't get enough food and he was always hungry. That's why he's fat.
Fair.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this was just one of the many issues that Bar-Jonah struggled with early on. And so apparently, as he would grow up, he began showing some behaviors that arguably it could be considered age appropriate, but in combination with everything, kind of started to raise some pretty significant red flags, and it was worrisome.
Okay.
So he would often steal things from his siblings and from other kids around him.
Sure.
And it was reported that, according to his older brother Bob, as soon as Bar-Jonah could form sentences, he was lying. As soon as he could walk, he started stealing. So like early on, he was described as like a kleptomaniac. He would just steal and steal and steal.
Huh. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it was also reported that Nathaniel's father, that Bar-Jonah's father, was reported to be pretty abusive, at least towards Bar-Jonah. According to Bar-Jonah later on, he would say that his father would frequently beat him as a child with a thick leather belt. And he was reported to be a strict disciplinarian and believed that corporal punishment was what was necessary to keep his son from stealing and from him growing up to be queer. So I don't know if, Papa Philip's own insecurities or paranoid thinking kind of played into that. And we don't know if Bar-Jonah's acting out behavior was in response to the disciplining or like what came first, the chicken or the egg. We don't really seem to know.
Well, and again, I think it's one of those things like all I'm not gonna say all parents. I think a lot of us parents, you view something in your kid that seems a little off, and you automatically are like, oh, I better do something, you know, to correct this, right? Like, so if
Right.
he's eating a ton, if he's taking stuff, I mean, I imagine that in his mind, it's like, we've got to put a stop to this because next
Mhm.
thing you know, he's going to be gay, like something crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I think that, we just covered that on this idea of like, do you parent out of fear or do you parent out of faith? Which, I mean, we won't get off on that. But again, like, what is your motivation? Are you a fear-based parent and you're scared? And it
Right.
sounds to me like he probably was scared that his
Yeah.
kid was going to end up XYZ,
Turning
right?
into what he ended up turning into.
Turning into what he ended up turning into.
Yeah.
So,
And so by the time he was 6 years old, Bar-Jonah just became more and more odd as a boy.
mhm.
And it kind of started with he would pick at his scabs, and like all kids pick at their scabs. So again, that's not super weird, but he would pick until it really festered and became more of a problem. And
Mhm.
then he would suck the blood from the wounds.
Okay.
So again,
So
that could
poor
be like
behavior control.
poor behavior control. And his mother was even contacted multiple times by the school to tell her that him doing this was like upsetting the kids and the teachers. But there didn't seem to be any really consequences to this behavior. And that's going to be a whole theme as we go through this, is him not having any consequences.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's already showing like lack of guilt. Like he obviously it didn't bother him if he kept doing it,
Mm,
like so yeah.
yeah. It was around the same time when he began to exhibit more dangerous behaviors. So in 1964, and at this time he's only 7 years old,
Mhm.
okay, he was gifted a Ouija board.
Gifted.
Gifted.
Okay.
Oh, is it Ouija or Ouija?
I mean, I've always said Ouija, but I'm not proficient in the dark arts. So I am a Slytherin, but not proficient in the dark arts.
So he was given a Ouija board and wanting to use the board and potentially have maybe other nefarious intentions. This is when Bar-Jonah would end up having his first victim, and he was 7 years old.
Victim?
Yes.
Oh, crap. We're already there. We're like 7 minutes into this thing and we're there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He ended up luring a 5-year-old neighborhood girl into his basement where he tried to strangle her.
Really?
Luckily, the little girl started to scream, and so Bar-Jonah's mom came kind of like running down the steps and intervened and let the girl go. So he's 7 years old. He lures a 5-year-old into his basement and tries to strangle her at 7.
Oh gosh.
And despite this really concerning event, Bar-Jonah's mom apparently really minimized this interaction and chalked it up to like a one-off event.
I'm sorry, but I don't know. I would like to think that I wouldn't do the same. I would probably do the same. I think most parents are like, oh, it probably was just an accident. It was probably, it escalated quickly. It's probably no big deal. We'll just sweep that
Yeah.
under the rug. It's probably no big deal.
Well, Tyra is a classic enabler. Okay. And everybody knows how much I love
You know,
enabling.
no.
She would give Bar-Jonah anything and everything he wanted. If she refused, he would throw hours long tantrums until he got his way. Throughout childhood, he almost never received any punishments for his poor behaviors. And this theme, again, would just track not only in their dynamic, but in like his social dynamic and relationship with the world as he grows older.
And see, that also makes me rethink that statement of like, yes, he had some brain, not damage necessarily, but some trauma that could have affected the brain. But it also could have been like the mama saying, like, well, he's just hungry all the time. I just don't know, you know? Like it could just be her.
This
Oh
dude had
gosh.
whole sort of problems. Like he also had this weird, um, like genetic enamel tooth problem.
Oh,
And
that was from the fever.
maybe, yeah. And he ended up having like really gross rotted teeth later on in life,
Yeah. I
which I'm
would bet
sure.
money. I would bet money it was from the fever. We see that a lot, unfortunately.
And so again, I feel like this lack of consequences to his behaviors kind of probably reinforced his mentality of like, huh, maybe it's not that big of a deal,
Sure.
or it reinforced the idea that he's going to keep doing it.
Sure.
And so, unfortunately, several more years go by, and he's now 13, and this is where he finds his second victim, and he's only 13 years old.
Man.
He ended up luring a 6-year-old boy from the neighborhood to an outside hill, and he had told the boy that he wanted to go sledding with him.
Mm-hmm.
And once Bar-Jonah and the boy reached this hill, Bar-Jonah brutally raped him.
What?
Yes.
Ooh, I'm sorry, but I was not expecting that one.
Yeah. According to John Espy's book, Eat the Evidence, in 1973, Bar-Jonah, now 15 years old, started cutting out letters and words out of magazines and composed a note that he used to try and entice 2 other young boys to a cemetery. Now, I didn't want to gloss over the one that we just talked about, the 6-year-old, but there are so many incidents with this guy where he was never caught, or we have no idea the actual number of victims.
Oh my goodness.
And this is starting when he was 7 years old. And so, again, he tried to lure these 2 boys out to the cemetery. He told them he would give them $20 and a surprise. But somehow the boy's mom figured out and stopped that from happening. Now, she did not end up pressing charges because she felt bad for him. And she felt like he wouldn't get help in prison. Instead, she wanted him to receive the psychiatric help.
Oh goodness.
And this is one of the beginnings of what is so terrifying about Bar-Jonah is there's so many women, especially throughout this story, throughout this case, that pitied him and felt bad for him because he was like this, this weird dude. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean. Because I'm that person. I'm always that person too, where I'm like, oh, bless them. They're just weird. They just need loving.
Yeah.
And I really do, but it's not always the answer, guys.
No. And there would be a long trail of suspicion that would follow Bar-Jonah throughout his life regarding disappearances of children in areas where he was always in or that were always close to him.
Mm-hmm.
But as you'll see throughout this case, there's never any evidence that links him to the majority of the suspected victims.
Mm-hmm.
And so one suspected victim was a little girl by the name of Janice Catherine Pocket. And she was just 7 years old when she disappeared on July 26th in 1973. Around 3 p.m., she was riding her bike from her home in Toland, Connecticut to go look for a butterfly that she found earlier.
Stop.
She was heading to Rhodes Road, which was just under a mile from her house. About 30 minutes later, her mother discovered her bike, but there was no signs of Janice. And investigators believe that Bar-Jonah may have been involved in her case because they found out that he lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, which, like, during the time of her disappearance, it was only like 20 miles away from Toland.
Yeah.
And Janice's disappearance happened only 10 months before Bar-Jonah would find another victim, and they never found her. It's still an open case.
Oh my goodness.
So there's no evidence tying him to that, but there's just a lot of these overlaps where people think that he might have been involved,
Right.
but there's no evidence pointing to it.
Right.
And so a lot of times there were victims that were unknown to exist fully or unknown until they came forward later in life.
Right. Right.
And one of those people was a woman by the name of Mary Petroni.
Okay.
Mary Petroni was a probation officer in 2001. And I know I'm skipping forward a little bit, but we're still back in the 70s here. And she lived in Eastern Connecticut, and she ended up reporting an attack that she endured when she was only 9 years old.
Oh,
So a lot of stuff comes out in the year of 2001,
mm-hmm.
and this prompted her to revisit the attack that happened when she was 9 in that area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She had told reporters that her attacker was never caught, but she discovered who he was when she saw a picture of Bar-Jonah in the newspaper as an adult, when she was an adult.
Did it like bring a flashback to her? Like she recognized it?
Yeah. And so what she shared
goodness.
was that in May of 1974, when she was 9, she was walking home from a friend's house in Woodstock when a man claiming to be her father's friend offered her a ride.
Okay.
He told Mary that her mother had asked him to give her a ride home, and she reluctantly agreed. And she would later say that when they drove off, he locked the passenger's door, smashed her head with a rock or a hard object.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that the only reason she thinks that she survived is because her attacker became scared when she started to scream, and he pushed her out of the car and drove away.
Oh.
And so she would go on to identify that this dude was Nathaniel Bar-Jonah.
And that kind of triggers a thought. I've never really thought of reporting something that happened in someone's past, but I mean, I hope that if whoever you are is listening, like if you have an attack that happened 15, 20, 30 years ago, you can still report that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really could be the key to a case.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about it that way.
Yeah. And, there are definitely limits of, what's it called?
Statute of limitation type
Thank you.
of thing.
Statute of limitations, but, it depends. And I know a lot of states, I think, are trying to be a little bit more progressive with that stuff than they have been.
Sure. But I mean, at least it could be bringing new light to a case or to a person.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
yeah, wow.
And so this dude is just out of control at this point, and he's like 13, 14,
I
15
was going to
years.
say, remind me how old he is at this point. He's early
13,
because I was
14,
trying to do the
15.
math in my head.
Yeah.
Golly.
And so his violent behaviors and dark desires would continue to escalate throughout his life. So this is just the beginning. This isn't even, I mean, it's all horrific stuff, but he
Sure.
just progresses and progresses.
Sure.
By the time that Bar-Jonah was a senior in high school, he ended up impersonating a police officer. And while doing this, he found his third victim. He would go on to abduct an 8-year-old little boy by the name of Richard O'Connor while Richard was on his way home from school.
Okay.
Bar-Jonah kidnapped him, brought him in his car, brutally raped him, and strangled him while he was in his car. By the grace of all that is holy, a neighbor witnessed him ripping this kid off of his bike and throwing him in his car from their window at their house, and they immediately called police.
Oh.
And so police began searching for the boy, and a patrol car soon found the vehicle that matched the description in that abduction.
Uh-huh.
And it was parked in a parking lot, kind of a remote parking lot, and Bar-Jonah, who was still David Brown at this time, was in the vehicle with 8-year-old Richard. And officers, it's just like a movie, they were able to arrive just in time to save him. They found him unconscious on the brink of death. He was bloodied and had defecated and urinated everywhere from the assault, but he survived.
Oh my goodness. And to me, this is where I'm like, the end, right, Bailey? The end.
This is just the beginning.
Like, no, this is he should have been thrown in jail. The end.
And literally my next kind of statement is he is one of those guys that we talk about who always slips through the cracks of the system.
I don't understand it. I don't understand it.
And so after the sexual assault of Richard, well, I should say sexual assault and attempted murder of Richard O'Connor, Bar-Jonah was promptly arrested, but he was only sentenced to several months of probation. And so he would spend the rest of his senior year in high school on probation.
Almost what?
Yeah.
No.
And this did not deter him whatsoever. So immediately after graduating high school,
it probably fueled his fire.
While still being on probation, Bar-Jonah just could not contain himself. And so after he graduated, he drove up to Hartford, Connecticut, and went back to his favorite MO of impersonating a police officer. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, this dude is so power hungry, like attacking little boys and girls, impersonating police officers. And unfortunately, he would find his fourth victim. Bar-Jonah soon abducted a 9-year-old girl and proceeded to brutally rape her in his car. Mm. At some point during the attack, the girl began to convulse and vomit, so he freaked out and kicked her out of the car. And so, like Richard, miraculously, there was a good Samaritan who had witnessed this, wrote down his license plate, and reported it to the police.
Oh my goodness. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
The amount of times, number one, thankfully that victims survive. I shouldn't say thankfully. Like, that's such a hard statement, right?
There's not even like a good sentence for that.
There's not even a good sentence for that. But I'm going to stick
gratefully they did survive, right?
They did survive, I'm sure, with trauma in tow, but like how this many victims survived, how this many people were able to witness stuff.
This gets worse. Just save it. And so Bar-Jonah, once again, he was arrested. And mind you, he was still on probation, right? But again, somehow, this arrest never made it back to Massachusetts because this was in Connecticut, never made it back to his probation officer. So when he completed his probation for the Richard O'Connor attempted murder and rape that he got a few months for, not having any word to the contrary of a successful completion, and it didn't receive any word of this arrest in Connecticut, he was released from probation in May of 1976 with a letter thanking him for his cooperation.
No, no, ma'am.
So this dude, by this point, is what, 18, 19 years old?
Yeah.
He's already assaulted one little girl, raped and almost killed 2 little boys, raped another little girl. He's had 4 victims that we know of,
Right.
known to law enforcement, and he was given probation for one of them, all while having raped and almost killed other children while he was on another child while he was on probation, and was released with a thank you letter.
I was going to say, and a thank you letter.
Yeah.
And a Hallmark thank you letter.
So by the time that Bar-Jonah was about 20 years old, he went from impersonating a police officer to impersonating an FBI agent. And I wrote, get a fucking grip, dude. You're like 400 pounds. He's like 300 pounds at this point. And at some point, I don't remember which potential victim, because there were a lot of them, but he tried to pick up this one kid later, and this kid like yelled at him and ran away. It was just like, you're too fat to be a cop. And he was like, sucker, like, I'm not falling for your shit because you are way too fat to be a cop. Like, you're lying.
No.
And so on September 24th, 1977, while impersonating an FBI agent, Bar-Jonah abducted 2 boys coming out of a movie theater. He drove them to a secluded area, and he quickly overpowered them, right, because they're children, and he handcuffed them. He proceeded to separate the boys, and I put, because you're a little bitch. And he put one of the boys in the trunk of his car, and he took the other one to a nearby area where he assaulted him, tried to strangle him, and lay on him to suffocate him with his weight, which is another weird MO of his.
I mean, I naturally want to say, what a psychopath.
Right?
But I mean, like, what a psychopath.
Now, what is amazing is this little boy only pretended to be dead, and it was so convincing that Bar-Jonah thought he was dead. He even blew cigarette ashes on his face, and the boy just laid completely motionless and convinced him that he was dead. And I put here like a fawn trauma response. So you have 4 primary trauma responses. You have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And fawn you hear a lot in these cases where you have these victims, whether it's like a kidnapping victim, an attempted murder victim, where they, play dead or play into the perpetrator's fantasies or delusions or whatever. And so I just put, this little boy had this is why a trauma response happens, is because it can save you. And so Bar-Jonah was convinced that this little boy was dead, left him on the ground, and drove away with his friend still in the trunk. And this little boy who lived ran all the way to a police station, reported to them, and gave them a full description of the car and of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. And so in a short period of time, police were able to find Bar-Jonah in the vehicle matching the description. And they found the boy who, again, miraculously, he was alive, still in the trunk.
Why are you still talking, Bailey? Why are you still telling me about this case? How many times should this case have been like, and that's the end?
I know. So this little boy was kidnapped, terrified, made threats because Bar-Jonah would be like, I'm going to kill your friend if you do this or if you do that, right?
Sure.
Almost got squashed to death by this big ass gross dude who probably smells like Funyuns. And then Bar-Jonah drives off with his friend in the fucking trunk of his car. He goes to the police station, gives him a full description. He gets caught and he saves his best friend's life.
Children's
How
book.
Amazing is that?
Superhero children's book.
I know. Finally, right, because of this event, Bar-Jonah was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced between 18 and 22 years in prison.
Okay. Thank you.
Right? Finally.
Thank you.
And so while in prison, naturally, Bar-Jonah began meeting with a psychiatrist. And this psychiatrist, I guarantee you, is sitting there being like, don't breathe on me, number 1. And number 2, I don't get paid enough to be sitting across from you people doing this stuff. Dr. Toomey, I don't know how you do it. We love you. And so he started talking to this psychiatrist, and he started to tell him of all of his fantasies.
Mhm.
And those fantasies revolved around murdering mostly children,
Mhm.
dissecting them,
Mm.
and eventually eating them.
Oh, ew. Do you know that in junior high they start dissection with a pickle?
Oh, I had a frog when I had it in a skate.
Yeah, well, they do a frog and a pig eye, but they start their dissection. Their very first thing that they dissect is a pickle.
That's smart.
Isn't that
Yeah.
so great?
Yeah. And so this psychiatrist is like, bro, okay. So he ended up making, in 1979, he made the recommendation that Bar-Jonah be moved to a mental hospital. And so Bar-Jonah was subsequently transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital, and it's a hospital for sexual predators for mostly men. And I think that Dr. Toomey talks about the same hospital in our interview with him.
Yes.
I think he was saying that one of his mentors actually worked at that state
Mm.
hospital. So it's really interesting.
I don't know. The only thing I can think of right now is like Batman and like Gotham City and how they always have like state hospitals, like
Yeah.
hospital of like the criminally insane. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
was he roommates with the Joker or the Riddler? Like,
Well, and so there's in this book that SB wrote, there's like a 2 or 3 part book. And I didn't read all of it. I just skimmed through it because I'm not reading 3 books for one episode. I'm sorry, you guys. You can hate me forever. But Bar-Jonah met all of these pen pals in prisons, and they were all like pedophiles. They
what?
just like all find each other.
No.
And so, again, once he was transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital, he told psychiatrists repeatedly about having sexual fantasies involving murder, torture, dissection, and cannibalism.
Okay.
And so, fast forward, he's been in there for several years. While he's incarcerated in 1984, David Brown, right? That was his name. He had a spiritual awakening while he was in prison.
No. No, not allowed.
And he ends up changing his name to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah. And Bar-Jonah is like bar
Oh,
hyphen Jonah in an
yes.
attempt to pay tribute to like his Jewish roots or something.
Yes. Yeah.
And he, of course, was a changed man. And with the help of his
Yes.
mother, okay, enabling Tyra, they hired 2 Christian psychologists and ended up getting a parole hearing where they testified that Bar-Jonah was no longer a threat to society and he was a religious follower and had been changed.
No, guys, no, please don't. Please don't do this because y'all are the worst. Y'all are the worst. Don't do that.
Superior Court Judge Walter Steele ended up ruling that Massachusetts had failed to prove that Bar-Jonah was dangerous and ordered him released on February 12th of 1991. And the judge was like, I will release you as long as you stay on probation and you move to Montana to live with your mom and seek psychiatric help. And Bar-Jonah was like, yes, sir,
Yeah,
absolutely.
sure. No problem. I will be expecting my thank you card for being a model prisoner in the mail by next week. Stop.
Yeah, so they hired these psychologists. They're like, nope, no fantasies of cannibalism and raping children here. And yeah, he's good to go. And the judge was like, all right, cool.
Oh, what?
So after being incarcerated for 12, 13 years, David Paul Brown was released from jail or the psych hospital in 91 and was now known to the world as Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah or Nathaniel Bar-Jonah.
I just want to remind everybody that if Bailey and I were to write like a hot check, we would be doing our podcasts from jail for the rest of our lives.
Oh, because we get caught on
Because
everything.
we would get caught and they'd be like,
Oh,
nope.
100. And they'd throw the book at
They
us.
would throw the book and we'd be like, I am literally so sorry. I will buy a stamp. I will pay the interest on this hot check. And they'd be like, nope, you're a danger to
They'd
society
be like, you're going to jail for 300 life sentences
for
for
300
a
life
$30
sentences.
check bounce.
I'm telling you guys,
I
I am
know.
not
That's why we're so straight
joking.
laced in so many ways.
I'm not joking. And then this guy is just like changes his name to
And he's just like,
Hooploppy. And
and he's
here
just
we
like, no, I'm
go.
good. Yeah. And so, I mean, he was a changed man for a whole month
Mm,
when he got out of prison
mm.
because just a month after he got out of prison, he saw a 7-year-old boy sitting inside of a car outside of a post office in Oxford, Massachusetts. So Bar-Jonah entered the vehicle and sat on the little boy, trying to suffocate him with his weight. And thankfully, and there were mixed reports. Some of the reports say it was a mother, some say it was civilian, some say it was both mother and civilians, but someone noticed it and they intervened, and he fled the scene. I mean, he did not make it far. When police arrived, someone from the scene had gotten a good look at him and described him to one of the police officers. And in a beautiful twist of fate, this police officer recognized Bar-Jonah's description because he was one of the officers who arrested him the 13 or 15 years before. So he was like, I know this creepy Funyun smelling dude. All right. And
this is another one of those where you are like, if I would write this up and try to sell it to MGM, they'd be like, no, absolutely not. This is dumb. This would never happen.
Yeah. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was once again arrested. And so I don't know what number arrests we're on. It's like 3 or 4 or something. And this is the reason why, like, I'm not trying to make fun of this man's like weight, okay? But all of these freaking guys in these cases that we've covered, Ronald Dominique, Danilo Restivo, and now this dude, have the same core elements that just get under my skin.
Yes.
This is what Bar-Jonah said, okay? So they arrested him and they're like, what happened? And he was like, no. It was raining. It was raining real hard and I had to get out of the rain. And I saw this car and I was like, I am going to jump in that car and get out of the rain. But I did not see the whole ass 7-year-old boy sitting inside that fits my arousal template and sat on him. Get the fuck out of here. Like, you can't even take, what item number is this on the psychopathy checklist? This is pissing me off.
So that one
failure to accept responsibility for one's own actions
and pathological lying. So probably item number 4. So I have a friend that used to work in like wound care. He used to work at the hospital. And this one time, this guy came in and he had a whole onion, like still in a bag, like still in the bag that you get from the produce aisle, shoved up his rectum. And he was like, I don't know what happened. I slipped and I fell and the onion went up there. And it was like, no, you didn't. You had somebody trying to be kinky. You had somebody insert it and it got stuck. Like, that's all that I can think of is like, no. It was
Sorry, it was an accident. It just happened.
It just happened. I opened the door
and sat on a whole 7-year-old child.
Oh, that, like you said, that fits my
arousal
template. Oh,
yeah.
My God.
And he was like, yeah, I was just going to wait in the vehicle for the driver to return and ask him for a ride home. Like, go stand under the awning of the building. You psychopath. You fucking psychopath. What are you doing? And so the cops were like, okay, right. He was like, didn't know the boy was there, accidentally sat upon him. I'm so sorry if there was an injury. It was totally accidental.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, after police questioned him, because he's got no backbone, right? He eventually was like, yeah, I knew he was in there. And yes, I was going to kill him.
Oh.
Like, yeah, I was going to like probably assault this little boy and then I was going to kill him.
But that was the old me.
That was the old me because I'm now Bar-Jonah and I'm, I had a spiritual awakening in the fucking prison. Me. But I've only been out for 30 days. And so because of this, he was given 2 years of probation, along with the condition that he moved to live with his mother in Montana.
That was already the condition, and he couldn't keep it within the navigational beacons on that previous condition.
Right. Well,
I mean, this is literally like the law. Like, this is like the legal system saying, like, I'm going to count to 3. 1,
and they actually don't do anything.
2.5.
Oh man.
2 and 3. Don't make me count to 3.
Come over there. Don't make me count to 3. Yeah. So they were like, you have to leave Massachusetts and you can never return. Like, this is 1742, where you're exiled from the country. Like, what?
You need to go and like assault and sit on
Live in
people in a
exile
different,
in Montana.
right? Like you need to go and assault and sit on people in a different state. We're tired of you doing it here in Massachusetts.
And literally, I wrote, right. So we'll just release a violent pedophile, hemophile loose. So it's another state's problem. And I was like, what about the poor children in Montana? Right. Like,
Right?
and again, for some reason with this dude and his luck, after the arrest in Massachusetts and him being placed on probation, he moved to Montana with his mother. And somehow there was a break in communication between Montana and Massachusetts. So when he had gotten to Montana, he met with his probation officer and disclosed some of his past criminal record, which you're supposed to do. So this PO made a request to Massachusetts probation office for them to send more records regarding Bar-Jonah's history and his psychiatric evaluations. But for whatever reason, they never, like, at one point they were like, we can't find it.
Because he's under a new name. And they're like, well, there's nothing under Bar-Jonah's.
Yeah, I don't know. And
what I would bet money at this point, after listening to this dumbass case, I would bet that it's like, well, we don't have anything registered under that name. He's fine.
yeah,
He's
well,
great.
I'll give it to his PO. Like they kept, like Montana really tried to get these records, but what do you do if the other state's like, sorry, brah, like we can't help you. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they never got all of his records. So Bar-Jonah's PO had no idea the complete length and depravity of his criminal past.
Mm-hmm.
And so this allowed Bar-Jonah to melt into the local community, now under a completely new name, without a string of priors, which were all previously under David Paul Brown, except for that last one when he got out of prison.
Right.
Bar-Jonah ended up moving to Great Falls, Montana, where his mother and older brother Bob lived. So when he got there, he ended up moving in with his mother, as the court had required him to do. So what did he do? He turned a new leaf. No, he didn't.
No. Psych.
No. He started collecting toys, stuffed animals, and Star Wars memorabilia. And not like nice toys, but like those super previously owned kind of stuffed animals and toys,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And he had a booth at an antique mall where he would set up these toys and it would attract all of the children. And he went by BJ and had a business card that said he specialized in collectibles. So BJ's Collectibles. Chelsea's face.
I'm like, if we had somebody that was writing a book about this interaction that Bailey and I are having, it would be like, and the listener rolled her eyes and let out a ragged sigh. Like, get out of here with this.
And it always blows my mind that these predators, like how they're able to find all of the loopholes. You know what I mean? He wasn't a registered sex offender, right? Like he didn't go on any registry for sex offenders. So nobody knew he was a sex offender selling toys to their children in an antique mall. It was around this time that Bar-Jonah was a sleazy toy salesman and he met a woman named Julie Watkins. She had been browsing in an area when she noticed Bar-Jonah selling toys. And wouldn't you know it, she had her son Sean with her, who was an 8-year-old little boy. And Julie and Bar-Jonah struck up what you would call a friendship.
Gross.
Julie was concerned that her son, Sean, needed a father figure or a role model since her husband had kind of been out of the picture for a while. Are you okay?
Stop. Like like when you're on the treadmill and they have like those emergency stop buttons to stop the treadmill super
Like the
fast.
cords that come
like
out.
the cord that comes
Yeah.
out. I'm like looking for this cord. I'm like, stop.
We're not
Stop
even
the
like
ride.
20% deep into this. So him and Julie struck up this friendship and she was like, you would be a great mentor for my son. Now, to be fair, to be totally fair, she had no idea of his history. Okay. So, and I really try to give people the benefit of the doubt because when you're in stuff, you don't see it as clearly as you do hindsight, right? And so this friendship would turn out to be an opportunity for Bar-Jonah, obviously unbeknownst to Julie and Sean. So when Julie and Sean would visit, Bar-Jonah would have what for the boy? What would he bring him?
Well, toys, Star Wars figures.
Yeah, he would bring him
Yes.
toys, a new toy. And Bar-Jonah would like play with Sean all the time. They'd like get on the ground and play toys and cars together.
Tickle
And
fights.
Julie just gushed about how much attention her son was receiving from the seemingly really nice guy.
And y'all, that breaks my heart as well, because as a mom, again, you do want, it's like you just want good influences with your kids. You want people to love on your kids, especially if they are lacking, a
Well,
father
and
figure or whatever it is.
yeah, and I also think that all too often times people really do kind of get in the habit of blaming victims because like Julie's a victim too.
Yeah. Yes.
And we overlooked the fact that Bar-Jonah obviously became very skilled at what blending in.
At glibness.
Yeah.
Glibness,
At
number
like
one.
false charisma and being charismatic
Yes.
and charming and all of these
Superficial
things.
charm, number one. Glibness, which that's my new favorite word.
Yeah. She was just like, yeah, I mean, it's great. Sean has this role model who's this really nice guy. And she also noticed that Bar-Jonah had flyers advertising his babysitting services. So this dude started babysitting. And because he wasn't a registered sex offender, there were no background checks that showed all of that, if they even ran background checks back
I was
then.
going to say, guys, this was the 90s. This is the early 90s.
And so as Julie and Bar-Jonah's friendship continued, and he would come over for dinner, and she would soon consider him one of her best friends. And Bar-Jonah eventually began babysitting Sean from November of 1992 through June of 1993 until she moved to Haver, Montana to live with her new boyfriend, Steve. Thankfully, this new boyfriend was just like, Jules, no. You do not need to be leaving your son with this grown-ass weird
man.
dude
Yeah.
overnight. You don't even really know him.
Good.
Because he had already stayed several times overnight with Bar-Jonah.
Good job, Steve.
And I think it's no surprise to anyone listening that not long after this time frame, Sean started to demonstrate some pretty concerning behaviors, the little boy.
Yep.
About a week after one of his spend the nights with Bar-Jonah, Sean was observed pulling at his privates, and he told his mom that his privates hurt. And this eventually triggered a domino effect of attention for Bar-Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
Attention in like legal in the community, like this started kind of a big ripple effect.
Right.
So Julie ended up contacting the police, and Detective Belushi, remember our boy from Zachary Ramsey's disappearance, right? He would go on to interview Julie and Sean. And Sean was like absolutely hysterical. He didn't want to get Bar-Jonah in trouble. He didn't want him to go back to jail. And he would go on to say that, kind of in his own 8-year-old words, that Bar-Jonah would guilt trip him, saying like, don't tell anybody about our time together, and you don't want to be responsible for me getting in trouble, would you?
Sure.
So like he's like, and I don't mean this in a positive way, but he's like a perfect predator. Like he knows what to say to these little boys, right?
Absolutely. And like in their minds, in these little boys' minds, it's like, but he actually, yes, he hurts me or he does stuff that makes me feel uncomfortable, but he does bring me toys and he does play with me and he does give me attention, right? Like, that it's one of those, like, he actually is a nice guy to me. I don't want to get him in trouble.
Right. And it's very confusing for victims of abuse, right? So obviously there was an investigation. After this investigation, Bar-Jonah was served a warrant for his arrest in January of 94 while he was working at his BJ's Collectibles booth. And so Bar-Jonah ended up getting an attorney and argued that had he molested Sean, he would have killed him. So his defense was, I didn't molest him because if I did, I would have killed him. And for some reason, and I don't want to pass too much judgment, Julie would go on to write a letter expressing sympathy towards Bar-Jonah. She said that she wished for him to get probation and receive counseling. And she also said that she worried about Sean going through a trial and testifying, fearing that it would be more traumatic for him.
Yes. I mean,
so she's not super wrong, right?
I was going to say, she's not super wrong. Like, you really do think you're doing the best.
And she included a letter that her son still wanted to be friends with Bar-Jonah, and she was willing to do like supervised situations with her supervising the interactions. She felt sorry for him because he'd been through so much in his life.
Sure.
And she felt that jail would only negatively influence him. It would just sharpen his already skewed perspectives and skills, and she wanted him to get help. Now, by April of 1996, so this, process goes on for a little while, Bar-Jonah's attorney filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Bar-Jonah due to a lack of a speedy trial. And so on May 29th of 1996, that's exactly what happened. All of the charges were dismissed because he had a good attorney and there was a clerical error in the process. And so he got off completely scot-free.
Mm-hmm.
It was reported that this really bothered Julie because I think she had time to really process,
Sure.
What he did and the after effects of what Sean went through.
Sure.
And they ended up packing up and moving to California because she was worried that Bar-Jonah would come after her. So I think she gained a lot of clarity being away from him, right, from that whole situation.
Yeah.
And so for the thousandth time in his life, he gets off completely scot-free. And so that is where, Chelsea, I think we're going to have to leave it for part 1 because I'm on page 10 out of 19. So we're not even halfway into this crazy, gross stuff that is Bar-Jonah's mind.
Yeah. No, I say let's do part 2.
And I don't know, you guys, if we're going to release 3 episodes this week. That's probably going to be too much. So what we might do is release part 1, maybe do part 2 Friday or early next week, and then the interview with Dr. Toomey. We might have to do 3 in a 2-week span.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's just a lot. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how we feel. But I want you guys to make sure to stick around to get into arguably the most horrific part of this case, which is going to be the second half.
Do you remember hiking the incline?
Yes.
How you get to the summit just
the
to
summit?
realize it is the false summit, and you actually have the most horrific, even though it's it's only 200 steps more or whatever, it's only 50 steps more, but you're literally bear crawling those 50 steps. This is how I feel this case is going to be, where I'm we're there. It really honestly can't get any worse than this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's real bad. It's real bad. So you guys watch out for the next episode. We'll let you know when we're going to drop it, when we're going to release that, and then we are going to release Dr. Toomey's episode about psychopaths.
Yeah. So do your homework, brush up on the 10 items that qualifies you to be a psychopath. Make sure you are not checking off those, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators. Hey, Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
the flip side.